And we have Dr. Mahal with us. Welcome.
Yes, Dr. Maha, if you would like to have your camera off, if you are okay with that.
Yes, is it okay? Hi, everybody. Is it okay to keep it off?
It's okay. We prefer that to see you, but if you are if it is more comfortable for you to have it off, it's okay.
Okay, okay. I will try to prepare myself.
Take your time.
I mean, okay, thank you so much.
Sure, sure. Floor is yours, Khansa.
Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series of panels. We are happy to have you again. We are glad for this opportunity to learn on this very, very interesting day, which is the International Day for People with Disabilities. This day doesn't just celebrate a minority, but also is a reminder for us for how far we still need to go in terms of guaranteeing rights, in terms of including people with disabilities, in terms of promoting accessibility. This is one day, and this is one opportunity for us to come together and talk about disability, put it on our social media, run these campaigns. But we must remember that this is just a part of an effort that we need to make throughout the day. So just a general reminder. And this is exactly why we organized this panel where we blend disability and volunteerism, because in December, we also have International Volunteerism Day. So our panelists are going to talk to us. They're going to tell us how we can be engaged within the community and how we can take the message that we learned from this one International Disability Day and make our conversations inclusive on a grassroots level. Think about how to include people with disabilities, how to involve people with disabilities in everyday life, in everyday political discussions, in these social conversations, and in all of our spaces. So without further ado, let's hear from Ms. Karima from the US Embassy. Ms. Karima.
Thank you, Khansa, for that great introduction. It's always a pleasure to work with you. My name is Karima Daoudakuch. I'm the Cultural Attaché, US Embassy Doha, and it's truly a pleasure and honor to be able to host today's program. We're very excited to have with us very distinguished panelists. We have with us Rania Abu Ghaida from Best Buddies. Thank you so much for being with us. We have Mark Dyer from the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy. Thank you. Dr. Mahal Slatin from Qatar Society for Rehabilitation of Special Needs. Pleasure to have you. And Sabika Shaban from Hamad bin Khalifa University. Again, just a real pleasure to be working with all of you. Again, on behalf of the US Embassy, just want to reiterate how important this issue is truly to all of us. You know, to deprive a significant portion of the global population of its fundamental universal rights, to deprive them of access to education opportunities is truly to deprive all of humanity of its development and growth. So to be able to talk about such an important issue today, that the topic being ableism and, social impact, is really, I think, an exciting opportunity, and to have such accomplished and esteemed guests with us to do just that is really exciting for us at the US Embassy. So just wanted to again thank you on behalf of us at the Embassy for your engagement and your time, and to thank those who are tuning in today on Facebook, on Zoom, for their interest and their questions. We actively seek them and encourage them, and look forward to a very lively and interesting discussion. Thank you, Khansa.
Thank you for that introduction, Ms. Karima. Yes, our audience, we want to hear from you. We want to engage with you. We want to begin this conversation. And more importantly, we want to carry this conversation forward. So we're grateful to you for coming here today and for giving us this opportunity to make you a part of this conversation with us and share our space, so to say. So before we move on, we're just going to move on to introducing our panelists officially. We have very, very qualified people who've experienced this, people who've been a part of this community, and we're so grateful that they took time out of their busy schedule to speak with us. So our first panelist for today is Rania Abu Ghaiba from Best Buddies. Rania does a lot. She has an MBA. She is a registered nurse. But now she works at Best Buddies as an inclusion specialist, and basically she works with their programs and works with universities around Qatar. So our next panelist for today is Mark Dyer. Mark is someone who personally really inspires me as well, because he's not just an accessibility consultant, but he is also working on one of the projects that we talk a lot about these days, which is the World Cup. And he's trying to ensure that this World Cup is inclusive, is accessible, and because Mark himself also has a disability, I think it's really important to hear his perspective and to hear perhaps you are an individual with disability and want to become a part of this field and become a part of this conversation. So maybe he can tell you a little bit on that level as well. Our next panelist for today is also a very, very special panelist, and that is Dr. Mahal Slatin. Dr. Maha has worked extensively for the hard of hearing community in Qatar here today. She is also a professor at Cornell University in Qatar and works a lot with Qatar Society for the Rehabilitation of Special Needs. So thank you for your presence here, Dr. Maha. Our next panelist for today is also a dear friend, Sabika, and Sabika is currently pursuing her master's from Hamad bin Khalifa University, but she is also working at Hamad bin Khalifa University as a academic journal specialist. But more than that, most of you might know her as the brains behind the specially abled community, which is a platform around Qatar which sort of connects people with disabilities, parents of people with disabilities with different services that they require, sort of a platform where everyone can come, ask questions, find the support that they need. So this diverse array of panelists is here with us to give us their different perspectives, to tell us how we can be involved, and to tell us where we can improve. Thank you so much. So without further ado, let's move on to our questions. Before we do anything else, let's hear about their journeys. How did these wonderful people become a part of this community or begin to work for this community? And how are they a part of this conversation right now? What are they doing? So let's just go ahead and begin this conversation. Mark, would you like to go first and tell us how you became a part of this conversation and describe your journey for us and what you do right now?
Thank you very much. It's great to be part of this session today. It's such a positive day. And what I would say, first of all, is my personal journey began many years ago. I won't give my exact age away, but when I was 20, so over 25 years ago now, I became paralysed. So before that point, I had never thought about disability at all in my life. It hadn't had any great impact on me. And frankly, I'm in awe of a lot of you, your levels of involvement with not having those direct impacts. So my first interest was very much from a selfish perspective. I live in the UK, and back in early 1990s, access here was a real problem on all levels: intellectual access, facilities, services, any kind of infrastructure, getting work, the whole lot. So I was kind of inspired and driven to try and make what I felt was my own personal journey to improving accessibility in my life and also give me independence. And from my side of things, that was my key drivers. So I became involved in working on a number of different fields, but initially helping on things such as advising corporate companies around accessibility, how they made the improvements, and doing training around inclusion and disability as well. For the last, to cut a longer story short, for the last 15 years or so, I've been really working on major events. And for that, that's been different World Cups, different Olympic Games. And my role there's been around accessibility and inclusion advisor, from the design of buildings and following that on through to leading on transport programs of accessible transport. And my current role here within the host country is to ensure that we get the accommodation, transport, public realm, visitor attractions, everything right. My areas fall into the bits that are outside of your match day experience now. So you'll be at your match 4 or 5 hours a day, but when you come for that World Cup tournament, I'll be the one that's hopefully giving you the same quality experience as everyone else is getting.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think that's how my journey within this community also began. I have a disability, I'm blind, and so I wanted to be a part of these conversations. I wanted to be included and I wanted to get these opportunities. And so that's how it began for me as well, where I started to think of how I can give back and then also take back from my community. So yeah, thank you for sharing. And I look forward to the World Cup and, doing things accessibly. I think the metro is already, began that journey. I quite enjoy just running around Doha and doing it independently. So we can see a true impact of what you're doing. So let's move on to our next panelist. Dr. Mahal, would you like to talk about your journey? What brings you here today? What contributed to, your journey and your experiences?
Hi, everybody. At the beginning, I was so happy when I received the invitation. I love this event, and I feel myself, and just I can express a lot of my experience and personal level or as a professional. My journey started when I studied medicine. I love pediatric, and I was like enjoying looking after the pediatric patient. And I remember the most, frequent number of patients were with handicap were the Down syndrome. Then when I finished my education, I graduated, I came back to my country. When I joined my work, then after 1 year, I get married, and like all of a sudden, during my because I got a baby boy by cesarean section. I remember that even during the operation, when they just took me from the operating theater to recovery room, I remember the gynecologist, he came and he told me, sorry, but your baby is Down syndrome. You cannot believe, as I said, this is very most common condition. When I hear this, I came back to my pediatric book. I was opening everything. I was trying to read, I'm not at that time what I like, he was expecting reaction from my side, but I told him, thanks God. This much I told him. Then I became to know that I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky during my life. And just because I have Down syndrome, it means that because I can handle it. So I appreciated what I got. My son is lovely. Now he's 20, by end of December, on the 29th of December, he will be 21 years old. He's very lovely. He's very kind. He's very friendly. And then I decide to continue with a special need. But now, as a part of my professional, I'm working with special need and hearing disability. Now I'm dealing with all patients with cochlear implant, starting from selection and from counseling until programming. And I feel very happy. And I know that I can give more because, just to be part of the experience, I think you can give more if you will hear the story. Now I can feel the feelings of mother, how I can break the bad news for them, how I should tell them that, sorry, your son is not hearing. He won't be able to hear. He won't be able to talk without implanting him with cochlear implant. I'm so lucky, Mom. I have my son. He meant a lot to me. He teach me a lot. At the beginning, I was like, I was blaming myself. Why my son, he's not like others? But I reach a stage that I know that every child with certain capability, I'm happy. I love my child. I love what I have. That's why I fall in love with disabled, patient and disabled people.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think sometimes we often neglect the parent perspective while talking about these things and while having these conversations. So I appreciate your perspective. I mean, in that sense, I've been to a fair amount of doctors because that's something that everyone seems to recommend left, right, and center in terms of giving you a cure. But I think it's more important perhaps than actually giving that cure, to give that empathy, to give that hope for a future forward, and to give the tools for a future forward. So with reference to those tools, let's hear about another journey. Let's hear about Rania's journey with Best Buddies and in general. Rania, can you tell us about where your impetus for being a part of this conversation comes from, and what is it that you do and why do you do it?
Hi, Khansa, and hi, everyone. My journey is a long journey. It started in 2001 as I graduated as a registered nurse at the American University of Beirut. And I started immediately working at the medical center of the American University of Beirut. I worked as a neonatal nurse for kids who are prematurely born. As we know, people and kids who are prematurely born are more prone for disability. So I've seen a lot of cases and families with complete rejection of their babies. So this was so overwhelming for me. However, my journey at that center did not continue as I came to Qatar in 2011 and I started working at Best Buddies Qatar. Here I felt, where is the place that change can be done? Because Best Buddies help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to be included in the society. And this is a major concern for us because once they are included in the society, they can be included everywhere, educational streams and everywhere. After I was deeply involved in the journey, life gave me a greater commitment to my mission, which is my third son, Iyad. He was diagnosed at birth with Down syndrome. So my story is similar to Dr. Maha. I have my third child out of 4 children. He's my third child with Down syndrome. So I felt that this world has to be changed. It has to be a more peaceful world, a more loving world, a more compatible world for them to live in it. And of course, through social inclusion, they have to be accepted in this community so we can have a better world for them.
Thank you for sharing. Absolutely. I think it's not just about how we think and how we have these conversations on platforms like this, but what we take away from them and how we make our personal spaces more inclusive. Like, for instance, I was an intern at the US Embassy in Qatar before I actually, began organizing these conversations and took over this part of, the responsibility. And something that I really learned from, those I worked with was that they were constantly open to getting feedback and they were open to making their environment more accessible. And more than that, they were willing to acknowledge where things weren't working, where things weren't accessible. So I think that's super important. And I'm so grateful that there are people like Rania who are working on a grassroots level to pass this message of accessibility and inclusion, but then make sure that it is realized on a grassroots level. So let's hear from Sabika, because I know she unites a lot of people on a grassroots level as well to make sure that people make things inclusive, people think of accessibility. Sabika.
Thank you so much, Khansa, and thank you for the invitation to the panel. As you mentioned earlier, that I do work at HBKU, and I have been inspired to join a master's program in global affairs simply to learn how to contribute to disability research in Qatar, which I think is a very important avenue. But on the side, what I do is a passion project of mine, which is the specially abled community. And how that started was simply as my role that I have been engaged with the parent community in Qatar for about a decade now. And in the early years, when I would go back to my other home in Canada, and I would fly over to conferences and workshops. I'd fly down to the States to attend and access expertise over there, and come out really refreshed and reinvigorated. But when I would come back to Qatar, I would question myself that there must be resources here that I'm simply missing out on. And that's what got me started into literally embarking on this exhaustive journey to leave no stone unturned and look for every possible mechanism that exists here that we could take advantage of and benefit from. And I did. I found, I benefited. But then I also came across dozens of parents who would simply pass these opportunities by just because they were unaware of it or the information had not reached them. And that we got to a level where there was a tipping point, after which a few years ago, I decided that this simply should not continue. And I put together some of the parents that I knew into a single platform, and just with no expectations at all, just to say that here is a space where we can share information and empower each other. And that's where it started. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And today we have about 600 members on the platform. It's predominantly parents, but we also have any stakeholder that's interested in this special community, whether you're talking researchers, educators, therapists, doctors, special therapy providers, any or everyone who would benefit from more information on what is available in Qatar in terms of services and mechanisms. And that's what we started. And this community has grown to become this beautiful space. So we get queries posted such as, I have a child, for instance, with Down syndrome, and and he would love to access art and music. Where do I go? You'd get other parents saying that I'm having difficulty finding a school for my child. What options can I pursue? Or an educator saying, I really feel the gap in this particular skill. Who can train me? And then the community comes together to answer these questions and to ensure that you leave with some additional information that you could work on to move forward. So overall, in the volunteerism kind of context, this specially abled community is literally based on the premise that information is empowering, that it equips parents and stakeholders with the skills and a direction to build a pathway and action plan, and literally transforms a family's view of the future from being something bleak and negative to something that's just a lot more brighter, hopeful, and full of opportunities and choice.
Thank you so much. I think there's a lot more that specially able community does. I mean, I can talk about my own experience with the community. So I got a QNRF grant and I was researching on employment opportunities for people with disabilities in Qatar. And I'm a student and I needed a lot of these access to a lot of these people who were participating within the disability community, had disabilities themselves, knew people with disabilities, knew people who were working with employment and disability and all of that. And I didn't really know a lot of places that I could just go to and ask people to respond to my survey. So, specially abled community really became that platform for me where I went and I, disseminated my survey and I got the responses that I needed. I mean, that's my personal interaction with them from other than what Sabika has told you about it. So while we're talking about that, that thread of research, of benefiting, of growing, let's go back to Mark and hear from him about where Qatar is going. Where do you see Qatar's future in terms of accessibility, in terms of inclusion, particularly in light of all the work that you've done with the World Cup?
Thank you. Well, I think for any country in the world to win a World Cup is about as big as it gets. Nothing focuses the attention of the world upon you than putting on an event of this size. And it's obviously a huge honor for Qatar to be hosting a World Cup, but that presents in itself a lot of challenges, but also huge opportunities. And I think on the agenda of inclusion and disability, those opportunities are absolutely massive for us. And there are certain things that we have that have helped us trigger and move things forward. And I think one of the great tests we've got going forward is the fact that we know that we've built the most amazing stadiums in the world. They generally are up there with anything else you'll see internationally. But that part of that requirement is that from FIFA, we have a certain number of accessible seating spaces. So we have 0.5% of that capacity be wheelchair users. We have accessible seating for other people with disabilities as well, so they can get an environment that feels comfortable and safe for them. We look at other provisions such as sensory rooms, adult changing facilities. So these are all amazing features we put in. Now the challenge then comes for us saying, okay, we can provide people with an amazing match experience. How are we going to make the rest of the experience work for them? How are we going to get that number of people coming through into the country and give them the experience they expect, either on their transport, accommodation, their arrivals, or to share the same visit experience as everybody else? So what this World Cup win gave us in Qatar was this opportunity to have a catalyst for real change. And that change initially tends to focus looking at an infrastructure side of things, because it's very easy for people to look at saying, what can we do and what can we fix? But the reality is it's about how do we provide services, how do we improve understanding, and how do we create a better inclusion of disabled people? How do we let disabled people, in whichever country it would be in the world that's hosting this, but particularly for us in Qatar, give disabled people a voice, an opportunity to have a say in what's going to happen with their future. So by having this catalyst of 2022, we accelerate a lot of those processes. And that's the real bonus and a real win for us, because everyone wants to work together. Everyone wants to be part of this story, and everyone wants to focus on making Qatar look amazing and be inclusive and give that great experience. So I think there are real wins to having it. We now have the challenge of how we make those opportunities. And we have some really amazing things that have been happening, as I've already mentioned a couple of things with the stadiums. But we now have to go to this next level of saying, how do we change those country environments to work as well? How do we give enough accessible accommodation? So we have done a lot of work with different providers at the moment to say, how can we provide more wheelchair accessible rooms? How do we provide facilities in those rooms for people who might have a hearing impairment, which can be very simple in some cases, such as a vibrating pillow for things like that, or someone with a visual impairment. What are we going to do if someone comes into the country with a service dog and needs support like that as well? So there's a lot of different elements that just feature there. In transport, we have an amazing metro system, as we've heard already. That's great, but once you step outside that metro station, what happens next? Can you get to your accommodation? Can you get to your visitor attraction? How does that journey join up? Because all of you out there will know that public realm in Qatar can be really challenging at times. So we have to identify which of these key routes, what levels of accessibility do we expect them to be, and how can we join up people's journeys? Because if we can't join up people's journeys and we give them a break point, disabled people won't come, and they won't want to be part of that experience, because it will affect their confidence, it will affect their belief in what we're trying to do, and frankly, they just won't get the same experience as everybody else. So from a Supreme Committee perspective, which is where I'm working under as that umbrella at the moment, our goals are very clear, is to work with other stakeholders such as the Ministry of Transport, Ashgal, the accommodation providers, we said, all these different parties coming together and recognising this is a real one-off opportunity that we get to deliver this. So you're going to see in the next 2 years, I'm hoping, and I'll hopefully sit back in 2 years and we can have the same conversation, but we'll have moved that journey forward. And we can say that we have actually created an environment that not only delivers for a tournament, but gives a legacy for disabled people in Qatar as well, that they feel fully included, and those experiences and the understanding of the people around them has increased.
Thank you so much for sharing. I just resonate with a lot of what you said in that sense, because yeah, the metro is accessible, but when you get out of it, you don't find places where pedestrians can just walk from one place to another. If not, you don't find security guards who've been trained to just give you directions and not think that you're lost and you're looking for, you know, your parents or someone. So yeah, I really do resonate with all of what you just said. And I really appreciate how like the World Cup sort of brought these winds of change which sort of propel us forward to take from our global partners, to learn from one another, to get involved, and if nothing else, just learn, because we're in the eye of the public and we have to maintain our image. So yeah, just thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, a huge role in all of this is the role of the volunteer, is the role of the bystander who sees me crossing the street and doesn't grab me from behind, or doesn't grab my cane, or doesn't see a person with a guide dog and doesn't give direction to the guide dog instead of the person walking with the guide dog. So let's hear from Rania, because she leads a team of volunteers. This is just general individuals like you and me who are interested, who are trained, who are given the tools to be a part of this community and then become a part of this community and then grow to love these experiences. So, Rania, can you tell us about your organization, Best Buddies? It's originally US based. How did it end up in Qatar? And how do you involve volunteers in these journeys? Perhaps you can share some anecdotes with us and tell us what the real impact of these volunteers is.
Yes. If I want to talk about Best Buddies International, it started in 1989 by Anthony Shriver Kennedy. It started in Qatar as an initiative of Her Highness Sheikh Hamouda bin Nasser in 2008. And now we are a program in Shafallah Center for people with disability and under the big umbrella of Qatar Foundation for Social Work. As you know, from Best Buddies International, it's present in 50 countries around the world. Our main mission is to include people with intellectual and developmental disability inside the society and to then end their social isolation. Now, what Mark was saying about accessibility and those people with disability that are coming for the World Cup from all around the world, this is our mission as for the volunteer basis. Best Buddies Qatar have a very big pool of trained volunteers. This is what I want to say. It's very important to say trained. More than thousands of trained volunteers, because as Best Buddies, we establish clubs inside primary, middle, high, and colleges in Qatar. And with these clubs, we try to get volunteers, and each volunteer is trained with an ID training and a friendship training on how to deal with people with intellectual and developmental disability. As you said, Khamsa, there is many gaps in this field. You know, the etiquette language used with this disability. As you said, you don't want somebody coming, holding you from behind and you don't know who's helping you. So as professionals, we train those volunteers on how to deal with people with disability. So Qatar has one of the biggest pools of volunteers. In addition, these volunteers, as I said, they are very well trained, and the important thing in our programs is we have one of the most amazing programs. It's called the friendship program, where a person with non-disability can be a friend with a person with disability, sharing the same interests, age, and gender. This has changed the concept of friendship worldwide. It has, with Best Buddies International, it gave the people the sense of what disability is. It made them feel that they are part of this community. Inclusion is one of the major things when we talk about social inclusion. It's one of the major factors worldwide to make people with disability feel that they have equal rights to be in schools, to be in jobs, to be all around.
Thank you so much for really sharing this and making us understand the role or the depth of the involvement of your volunteers. Because at the end of the day, we need people to take people with disabilities as mainstream, normal parts of their community, who aren't just spoken with on separated panels, who aren't just talked about as if they don't exist in these political spaces, but are a part of that conversation. I mean, going back to the grassroots of the disability rights movement, nothing about us without us. So I'm glad that you're really, taking it forward on that level. Our next question is for Dr. Maha. Dr. Maha, you are a very prominent leader within the medical community. So can you please talk about how the inclusivity of this community really has altered? And do you think that we can do more in changing these perceptions?
Yes. Let's say if we will go like 20 or 30 years ago, it is totally different from what we have now. Now, because like we have a lot of awareness programs, we are actively participating in, like, for example, international days of hearing, Down syndrome, autism. Awareness make people not to feel shy about what they have. Now, let's say, as from my work, like now we are starting to have a lot of awareness regarding hearing problem. Before, a lot of people, they feel that they cannot hear, and they feel that because of hearing problem, they are separated from the community. They want, include themselves in their community because of hearing problem, and they feel stigma just to complain that really, oh, I have hearing problem, because nobody like to wear hearing aid, or to have cochlear implant, which is tool that it may change the quality of patient or quality of our life. Now, you cannot imagine, like during this 10-15 years, I can see dramatic changes. Like now I receive a call or receive sometimes official emails from, let's say, from teacher that they have a student in their class with hearing problem or with cochlear implant patient, and they are very interested just to know what is cochlear implant, how I can deal with my student. Because I remember that one of this teachers, she was coming to me and she said, when I came inside the class, I saw one girl, she was wearing cochlear implant, and she said, I was looking at her and was start crying because I feel that I want to help her, but I can't. You know, just like with email, she was joining us for almost 2 months. She's attending courses. She's willing, and she's now with more confident to deal with these patients. Also now, like, I'm receiving a lot of invitation with Qatar Society for Rehabilitation, for schools. I'm going here and there presenting lectures and presenting, let's say, the difference between the normal hearing, the cochlear implant hearing, okay, disabled hearing, what they need. I can feel that the culture is now totally different, and they are very, very supportive, which is very, very very good, and I'm so happy. I feel that now I'm more productive by this. Like I can deliver my message, my information to everybody. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Maha. Can you tell us if there are any parallels or differences or similarities between how you've noticed the evolution happen in the United States and how you've noticed its impact in Qatar?
Okay. Actually, when I went through inclusion criteria in US and in Qatar, I couldn't find that much difference. Most of it is similar. Like both of the countries, they are like spending a lot of money that implementing plans, and also to put policies and to include a student or include disabled on the culture. I think both of them, they spend a lot of money. They are offering state of art and healthcare. But let's say the only difference I can feel, maybe the cultures, the acceptance. Like if I will go back, it will be very difficult to inform the parents that your child has, for example, this disability, or he cannot hear, or he need assistance. Now, with changing the culture, now as with the dramatic change, they accept. Maybe in United States, the culture is different. The acceptance it was much better than us. But for Qatar now, we are going in the same pathway. But as I said, I couldn't really find that much diversity or that much difference between both of us.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. I mean, I guess inclusion really is impacted by the fact that, cultural perceptions are different. Cultural perceptions in turn perhaps are shaped by things like the ADA, which is the Americans with Disability Act, which is, a hallmark law for people with disabilities, which addresses inclusion on social, economic, and political level. So yeah, absolutely. I think it is important to understand what really shapes these cultural perceptions. And, we've really been taking this conversation forward about talking about how on a community level we can improve things, how on a community level we can shape things. But we're all individuals at the end of the day, and we don't necessarily find communities where we contribute or where we can make that change. So let's just go back to Sabika. Sabika, do you think that is there a way for us to make this change on an individual level? Do you think on an individual level we can impact disability rights or impact inclusion and participation of people with disabilities in these mainstream spaces?
Thank you for the question, Khansa, and it's a very important question. You see, in any case of trying to implement a social change, it has to start from somewhere. And a lot of the times it starts from disparate individual efforts that kind of collectively become a force to be reckoned with. So in that sense, there are multiple ways where individual inclusion efforts can be put into action. And it all depends on whether the individual we're talking about has a disability themselves, or what is the relationship between the person and the community of disabilities. It depends where the person is placed in society, and then they can gauge their role. So just to put it to illustrate, number of ways that this could happen. It could be as simple as a family taking out their child with disabilities to a public space. That in itself is an inclusion effort to increase the visibility of a variety to showcase the diversity of our community out there in the public. It is as simple as a teacher who sees a child struggling in class and decides to appeal for accommodations, as opposed to trying to figure out a way where we can exclude the child so we can still maintain that very simple mold of a classroom. It could be even a recreation service provider who does not turn a parent away who really wants their child just to be part of some sort of recreational activity, but instead takes that added step to find accommodations and to make sure that that child, adult, youth, whoever it is included. So in the end, you need these people who have that drive to do so. These individuals need to understand the power of the impact that they can have. And then it goes higher. It goes higher to the kind of people we have on this panel who are passionate, who are in that place where they can actualize that change. But essentially what it is a kind of a ripple effect. The more you see these dialogues being created in the public space by individuals, whether it is by taking your child out or whether it is by creating extra accommodations, the more visibility there is out there, the more conversation starters are out there, the more people realize that there are gaps that exist, and then just get motivated. Because if you see almost anyone who works in the disability world, they have been inspired by something in their lives, even if it is a momentary kind of experience. And so we need to make sure that these momentary experiences increase in frequency so we can inspire more people to be part of this dialogue. So yes, individual inclusion efforts are incredibly important to the larger project of social change.
Thank you so much for sharing this. I mean, all of us described our journeys and we realized that, yes, there was that aha moment for us where we were like, we need to become a part of this. We need to do our bit. So yes, That's how it begins, us realizing our social responsibility to this community on an individual level, and then working to sort of contribute in any way that we possibly can in sort of shaping these narratives, in promoting inclusion, in at least making our own life more inclusive of people with disabilities and our own programs more accessible. If this hasn't convinced you to be a part of the movement, we can ask another question to Rania. Rania, can you tell us a little about how volunteers bridge a specific gap when it comes to the disability rights movement? How do they benefit the larger rights movement on the whole?
You know, you change a society when you start dealing with kids. When you try to change the norms of students from primary, middle, high school, and colleges. This is the way cultures are changed. So as volunteers and as best buddies, when we take our volunteers out and we take them to the mall on Down Syndrome Day, and they try to educate the society and the community on, about the rights of people with Down syndrome, about the day of Disability Day. So we deal all with those movements. We take the opportunity to educate our volunteers, and the volunteers themselves educate the community. A volunteer can change the perception of his family, of his parents, of his siblings, of his friends. So working on every volunteer will change the community, and knowing that the people with, letting them know that people with disability they have the right, they are given the right for equality and for inclusion. This is the major part that we as best buddies, the major role that we play on with our volunteers.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. I mean, from actually being there, providing these services, to just being a part of these conversations, we can do it all and benefit the larger movement on the whole. But then at the same time, we're volunteers, but we're also professionals, and we're sort of juggling these multiple responsibilities and multiple roles. So our next question is for Dr. Maha. Dr. Maha, how do you think our volunteering efforts can sort of help promote inclusive education, and sort of how do we distinguish between these different roles that we have as professionals and as volunteers?
In my opinion, first, we should work on awareness. Awareness is very crucial point. Second thing is vision. Let's say if I have a plan and I want the volunteer to share it with me, I know that from my side, I have, let's say, role and responsibility, and they have also the same. But we should communicate with each other. Like they should know what I need them, and what is the plan. Okay, what is the goals that we need to share it. The professional, they will just explain for the volunteers what they want, or what is the plan was put for this activities, and by collaboration between the volunteer and the professional, they will just join all together and start to do this, let's say, activity or a project. As Rania said, we cannot do anything without volunteers, because they can take their experience to their family, their friends, and they will break the fear of communicating with a special need. Like sometimes on my personal level, sometimes I remember when I was going out with my son, I hate the look of other people. They were like looking at my child, and like I can hear that some of them said, okay, he's crazy. Okay. Now we cannot hear this, because a lot of people, they are now volunteering, joining the activity. And they are just showing the community that, see, I'm dealing with them, they never harm me, they are normal, they have the right to participate with others, they have the right to have a good quality of life, they have the right, like whatever I have, they should have it. Volunteer is very important. Now we are even in our level, whenever we're having like activity worldwide, like hearing international or WHO hearing days, we are searching for volunteer. I mean, we can do the work by ourselves, but by sharing it, we can just elaborate more, and we can deliver the information to a large number of people instead of just decrease or just make it a small cycle. Volunteer is very important. And now I think even in school, in university, they just put it as like some of the school, they put it in their curriculum. That's why they are coming and searching for participating on such activities.
Thank you, Dr. Maha. I think, I guess engagement, collaboration, cooperation would be the keywords here in terms of what volunteers can do and what volunteers need to do. But as we've spoken earlier a little about how sometimes intentions are well-meaning, but they have bad outcomes, or they have outcomes that you don't necessarily want or desire. So let's just talk about that part of it as well, so that when we become volunteers or when we become a part of this conversation, perhaps we can make sure that we don't carry forward those things with us. So my next question is for Mark. Mark, how do you think ableism manifests into our efforts for social change? Do you think we can do something to stop it?
Yes, we can do something to stop it. I think it's hard though, isn't it? And I think any of us that have been experienced as either as parents or as someone who's a friend or as a disabled person ourselves, we all know that every time you have a bad experience, it can knock your confidence and it becomes a challenge. And I think that's what's the most difficult part of it. I think we're really interested in placing society as a whole across the world now, in that there are some disabilities that we all seem to be a lot more comfortable with. And there's some disabilities that we still find really hard and really challenging. Perhaps an example, if I go around as a wheelchair user 20 odd years ago, people would have looked at me, noticed me, children would have asked questions or whispered and things like that. I come to Qatar now, and it's a very different experience to how it was even 7-8 years ago in Qatar, that I was very much had a lot of novelty value. And whether I liked it or not, people would just come and push me around, and they felt they were helping, but it was kind of that, you know, the respect of your personal space and that. So I think some journeys for disabilities have gone a long way. I also think it's really interesting, and I know some of you been to other, some of the tournament matches that we've had, the observations of what I see of other spectators, that again, some disabilities are very comfortable, yet if they see a child just running up and down and not understanding perhaps why their behaviours are a certain way and why it's an exciting and overstimulating environment, there's a slight look of disapproval still. We have an education piece to do there for people to understand more about those requirements, those needs, and how we make that experience better. And we all need to be part of that learning process. And we're talking much more about other hidden disabilities, mental health issues that possibly we weren't before, but it's not as comfortable as seeing someone perhaps in a physical situation which you can feel very confident in terms of communication, behaviours and things like that. So in terms of making our changes, we all have to try and be brave, I think. We have to often, I think, as a disabled person or as a person in a situation, we have to take the first step still. Because if people are nervous about approaching us, we can't change that. And that's really, I think we're all on this call because we probably do that in our day-to-day lives. I suspect there's a lot of people out there that we don't see out so much in Qatar who find that much harder to do. And they take the knocks a lot harder and it's harder to come back from. So part of our role is to be ambassadors for that message, for raising the awareness, encouraging people to be confident with us and try and be confident with people back. And in the right way as well. You know, it's hard sometimes to be nice back every time when some people use the words they use. It's hard when they give you a look that you don't always appreciate. But that's, I think, what we need to try and do, and bring other people on that journey. And again, going back to the World Cup, we will have a lot of other disabled people come to this country for the first time. They will have a certain expectation and aspiration of what we can do for a country, as a country putting on a World Cup. And it's important we can meet those expectations. Just to say finally on that, the volunteering conversation here for me is really exciting. We, as you can imagine, are putting together a massive volunteering force at the moment. We are starting recruitment processes, which will be asking specifically if you have a disability, because we want to use your skills that you have in those areas. If you work with a disability organisation, if you have a particular interest, because we know that is valuable to what we need to try and do. And from a personal perspective, my own team that will evolve at the end of 2022 for a tournament will look to have a team of 7-8 volunteers, specifically with an interest and enthusiasm to sell that accessibility message out there. So hearing all these stories from everyone is really, I think, invigorating and exciting for the future.
Thank you, Mark. Sign me up. I'll be your first volunteer for the World Cup, for your accessibility. I'm excited. I'm passionate. I can give you my CV. Sounds like fun. But yeah, other than that, let's hear from Sabika. Sabika, what do you think on this discussion that we've been having? What do you think? How does ableism manifest? How can we stop it?
You know, ableism itself is such a complex notion that just the responses are very complex as well. But just to break it down really simply, one of the ways that it manifests is, for instance, language. And language is complex in itself, because you see, I think we as a community are not sure entirely how we want to be addressed. So you have these dominant terminologies like disabilities and special needs, but in certain contexts, they seem to have these negative connotations. And then we come up with these new terminologies like people with specific needs, the specially abled, the differently abled, so on and so forth. And then if we're going to go with those kind of terminologies, we really need to mainstream them a little bit more, use them in research, use them in daily conversations, and normalize their use. So language is a really important concept, and because it really gives away the biases that we have about the community. I think it's also the fact that when it comes to language, and we're so sensitive to, because it's such a sensitive area, even people with the best of intentions tend to misuse some of the language. Sometimes it's cultures that seem to think it's okay to say that if a person doesn't have the same number of limbs or thinks differently, could be referred to as abnormal, or just very disruptive language like that as well. So ultimately, what it means is that we need to be, as a community, a little bit forgiving when language is incorrectly used, but then also educating in terms of how to use correct language, or what would work for me may not work for you, may not work for someone else with a different profile. So I think it's definitely a conversation to have. There's no one answer, because it is a complicated topic. There could be multiple approaches, but just another kind of manifestation of ableism is just attitudes. To some extent, when we think about inclusion in certain spaces, we feel that it's a zero-sum game, where if we make a little bit of space for someone who is more diverse in their ability, it takes away something from us as a mainstream community. So I think we need to kind of figure out a way to reformulate those misconceptions, to make sure that they understand that, no, this is a win-win game. This is a way we're enriching our community by reflecting the wider diversity that we have, that it benefits you just as it benefits me to be sharing the same space and making those extra connections. So in short, there are multiple ways to address it, but I think we need to take an active role in that, in terms of advocating what we think is the better approach, and educating ourselves as well in how we want to be perceived.
Sabika, very, very important things you've said right now, but very difficult things also in terms of having these conversations with ourselves, in terms of keeping our minds open, in terms of thinking about them and understanding that this isn't just one conversation we can have and just find answers. I've had my disability ever since I can remember, and I've been thinking about these things, and I've been having these conversations. And I remember one of our first conversations was about different terms that are used, and I gave you my perspective on it, and you gave me your perspective on it. And I think what you really take from these discussions is just the fact that there is no one size fits all. You cannot find a term that everyone's going to be happy with. You cannot find a space where everyone's going to want to be involved. So I think it's really about finding that space which works for you, and letting every single individual with a disability define their own potential, define their own choices, define their own preferences, and whether that is in terms of whether they want to use a guide dog or a white cane or a different kind of a wheelchair, or whether they prefer specially abled, disabled, differently abled. I think our responsibility is to take our cues from them and also give them the requisite tools to make their own decisions about how they want to be referred to, or the identity that they want to take up on the whole. So whether that is as parents, as educators, as friends, I think we need to give them these tools and the opportunity to make these autonomous choices on their own, and to keep on changing as they see fit or as they need. I'm aware that we have a certain time constraint, and I have a lot of questions for my panelists, but I'll try to end my questions so that we can move on to our audience questions. So just a general question from Dr. Mahal. Dr. Mahal, how do you think we can encourage people to be a part of these conversations, to become volunteers within the community? What are some of the last messages that you want our audience or those watching later to take away from this?
Yeah. Personally, I do believe on awareness and education. Because a lot of people, they don't know what is, the value of volunteer. If you don't know the value of volunteering, then you won't actively participate on it. I do recommend that, let's say, a campaign should be done just to explain for others that because you are volunteering, it will add this much value to the community. Because you are here, you will take the feedback to your family, to your friends, to your parents, then it will be easy for other people. It will be easy for inclusion for disabled on the community, on the education. I personally believe once they know the value of volunteering, they will just search for volunteering, and they will search for a chance to join any volunteer. And on my personal level, I can reassure you that this is very, very, noticed. Like if you will go back so many years, nobody is volunteering and nobody is willing to volunteer. But now a lot of volunteers, they were searching for a chances whenever they have any activity, any event, they are willing, because they as a community, they give their value. Education and awareness, this is the key role for volunteering.
Thank you for sharing this. Absolutely, guys, remember education, awareness, something I will also remember. Rania, moving on to you. Firstly, how can we sign up with you guys? How can we sign up with Best Buddies? How do you think we can educate young adults to be a part of these conversations and be more inclusive in general? And any last messages you have for our audience?
Okay. First question, please. What is it?
how can we sign up for Best Buddies? How can we be a part of it?
Okay, through our website, www.bestbuddies.org.qa, there is a sign-in application where anyone can be a volunteer. Especially that we have, for example, in 90% of colleges in Qatar, we have clubs for all students to be part of volunteers. Schools can also call us to initiate opening a club for Best Buddies. We have many clubs in many different schools. This is the way you can sign up for Best Buddies. As for little kids, we have special programs, as I said before, friendship programs in schools on how to educate kids about the importance of having friends with disabilities, the way that this is a mutual relationship, how it will change their life and how they will have an impact on the lives of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. As you know, because Best Buddies, we deal only with mild to moderate intellectual and developmental disabilities. So through all this platform, we can change the perception of little kids. When a child goes to an event and he sees kids through Best Buddies with special needs, and he has the time to play with them, interact with them, even sometimes exchange numbers through the acceptance of parents and having outings with other families that do not have people with disabilities. This is a part of inclusion. So this is what we do at Best Buddies. We try to include them in many different aspects through events, as Dr. Maha, we do lots of awareness, public awareness. Our volunteers, they are the pioneers. We put them as the pioneers for public awarenesses. So all these platforms are available in Best Buddies to change the perception of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Thank you. So, Sadiqa, moving on to you. As an active parent within the disability community, what do you think is a role that volunteers play? Why do you think these volunteers are important in the journey of the parents, and like any last messages you want to give to our audience?
Thank you, Kansa. Over time, I've heard stories and anecdotes that have either gone incredibly well or horribly wrong. And usually you could trace it back to two possibilities in the way it should be approached. So I think at one point you're looking at an organizational level, where any organization dispatching volunteers ensures that just like how normal it is to take a first aid course, you take a diversity course, you take a diversity training in order to understand the different ways that you could approach, for instance, someone on a wheelchair, what is not right to do. For instance, approaching a child who may have a visible disability, and to know that just because they're not making eye contact or they're not responding doesn't mean they can't hear you. And just all these various different configurations. We are an essentially really diverse community. We're talking physical disabilities, cognitive, intellectual, sensory, a mix of some or all. So a diversity training is incredibly important on that organizational level. And this is also for any member of the public. But also you're looking at an individual level as a volunteer. All parents seek is to see compassion. That is it. So when you have, for instance, a regular public space where volunteers are there, and you've got a child who's got a tantrum or a meltdown, you want a volunteer to be able to come up and say, you're fine where you are, but if you need anything from me, or if you would like me to guide you to a quiet space, let me help you. Or just anything along those lines that shows that there is someone looking out for you. Because I think when I speak from the perspective of those parents who have children with cognitive disabilities or intellectual disabilities, or developmental ones, in that kind of arena, their world is full of medical specialists and therapists and struggles and then a lot of negotiation. But when you've got a volunteer who kind of represents that external world that they're not fully a part of, and when they show that compassion and that connection, it can change a regular experience to an extraordinary experience. So here is where I see that volunteers have a very special place in being able to make those connections. And just in terms of last message, I think that would just go for everyone in the audience or whoever is listening later on, that it is so important to exercise our humanity, our empathy, our tolerance, and to celebrate the imperfect. I think we are still very much driven by that mode of perfection. And I think we need to understand that perfection is overrated and the imperfect is beautiful, and we just need to be able to celebrate and accept and embrace that.
Definitely, I think question our definitions of perfect, the role perfect plays in our lives, and how much we aspire towards it. I think that's something very insightful to leave our audience with. How about you, Mark, as a disabled individual? What would you like volunteers to leave this conversation with? Any other special last messages you have for them? Any takeaways? Any key discussion points?
I think the key thing that I probably find is don't be afraid to ask, but don't be afraid also to be politely refused as well on things. We don't always need help, but there are times when we do. It's trying to judge and just assess that situation for an individual. So there'll be a lot of occasions when probably 90% of the time I will be completely fine moving around and I will not need any assistance. There'll be other times, that 10%, when it's great if someone can be there, and just be aware and recognize that maybe that's the time to ask a question. Or even if you ask when I don't need assistance or someone doesn't need assistance, do it in a way that's, and I think Sabika put it perfectly before, like when she said, if you've got a child that's maybe finding it a challenging time in the particular environment, saying it's okay, but we're here if you need us type thing. So sometimes less can be more. I think it's really hard for individuals who are volunteering is you want to be involved, you want to help, but you've got to let us be able to share that with you. When's the right time to get involved and make the difference for our lives? And I think that's the key thing.
Again, I really resonate with that. I think that's one thing that I would also want volunteers to take away from this. I mean, essentially, it really boils down to letting that disabled individual define their own needs, define their own identity, and define what they want to do proceeding forward. I think it's our role to be a part of that journey, facilitate whenever and wherever needed, but at the same time, don't direct where that journey takes them or where that journey is supposed to go and how it's supposed to proceed, and just be okay with that flexibility. And just the fact that there is no specific perfect way of how it's supposed to be. So yeah, join the conversation, join it practically, join it on your social media, and for now, join it by asking us questions. So this is your chance to engage with us, to ask as many questions as you want, and to become a part of this effort. So yeah, I think we already have some questions. So we'll have Ms. Asil from the embassy give us some questions. Ms. Asil.
Thank you so much, Khansa. So yeah, some of the questions that you have are already in the Q&A. So our valued panels, they can see them. So one of the questions directed to Ms. Rania. There are contradictory stereotypes at every turn. Societies assume that people with disabilities can't do anything, but everything they do is inspirational. How to deal with this stereotyping? And thank you.
Of course, I disagree. People with special needs, with disability, have their own capabilities. We've seen through early intervention and through education, where they are included in schools, they are reaching their maximum potential. We have many cases of lawyers with Down syndrome, of doctors with Asperger's. So it's not about inspiration only, it's about their capabilities. We have seen many kids with autism that are brilliant in drawing, they are brilliant in math. Each person has his own capabilities and he can reach through early intervention. And I always say early intervention is the key of success for all people with disabilities. Through their early intervention and through the awareness of families and through the input that families put on those people with disability, they can reach their maximum potential.
Absolutely. Thank you for your response, because I think it's really about the fact that as humans, none of us can do every single thing. I mean, I have a friend and they hate cooking, absolutely despise it. They don't have a disability, but it's just something they don't like to do. And I am a disabled individual, but I really enjoy that. And, you know, I relish the process of just making things just because I can eat them after it's done. So I think it's just recognizing the fact that people have different strengths and appreciating those different.
Sorry, go ahead, Khansa.
No, you go ahead. Next question.
No, sorry, it wasn't me. I don't know really what, like someone was unmuted, so sorry. Yeah, so the other question that we have, which is in the Q&A box, is, in fact, it's more like a comment. Thank you for all this event. Having accessible infrastructure and transportation is very important, of course. However, having an accessible society is more important. How can we make sure, how can we make the community itself sociable for people with disabilities? So,
Savika, I think maybe we can begin with you.
Sure, why not? Well, I suppose the biggest, it is a huge challenge. It is breaking barriers and it is challenging preconceptions. But because we have such a wide, you know, especially in Qatar, we are made up of different nationalities, different communities, different configurations. And so it's important that in whichever configuration you belong, and if you have a voice to mention, to make it normal to discuss debates and around disabilities, you've got to come up, you've got to state it outright, you've got to normalize these conversations in order to show that it isn't something that is driven by stigma. It is not something to hide. It is not something that is to be shameful of. It doesn't take away from anyone when there are disabilities involved of any kind. I know often when I've heard different stories and journeys of other parents, they've often mentioned that once they've actually come forward, once they've actually started these conversations, they underestimated the kind of support that they have received after. And we often fear that as opposed to look towards it. So I think it's all about being a bit brave, a bit bold, and a little bit reckless in trying to get out there and voice ourselves.
Thank you so much. And like, what's more important is that if someone wants to be that bold, if someone wants to step out, you give them the tools. And I guess that's where the metro comes in. So if you want to be bold and you want to go to the Pearls, or well, the metro doesn't go to the Pearls, but West Bay, and you want to see your friends there, you should be able to do that. And I guess that's where that physical element comes in.
thank you so much. So the other question is directed to Dr. Mahal. Regular masks during COVID-19 are not suitable for people with hearing disabilities. Masks with open mouth work better. What do you think about this?
Yes, true. Like now we face a problem with the children doing, let's say, face-to-face AVT, which is auditory verbal therapy, because some of the patient depends on the lip reading, and they will feel it obstacle if you will just wear the mask without having a look at your lips. But now, even as new behavior, now they're wearing the face shield. At least it will give them this opportunity. Open mask, it is not, I mean, open mouth mask, it's not practical, and even it is not usual to be worn, but a face shield, it will work. But it is true.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maha. I appreciate knowing more about that.
Great. Yeah, the other question is related to any applications or websites that would help consumers in Qatar or Doha to get to know places that are accessible for persons with disabilities.
Mark, would you like to talk about this?
Sorry, you are muted, Mark.
Apologies for that. I was just saying that there's an organisation for a source of information called Accessible Qatar, which many of you may know of. And I noticed Jack Saber, who's behind that programme, is actually on the call at the moment. So obviously, I've known Jack for a long time since I first arrived, and this is one of his driving ambitions to make it happen. And I think we have the hope that as we go forward over the next couple of years, we can extend and expand that as a programme as well. That has a legacy value going forward up to the 2030 vision and beyond. So that will give us information around accommodation, around the visitor attractions, around the transport elements. So a lot of those bits and pieces that you need to have confidence to go out there and do this kind of unbroken journey again. Can I be sure that every step of my trip, every step of my journey, when I go out, I can have the same experience as everyone else? And the key thing is you can do that experience firstly safely, secondly with dignity, and thirdly as independently as possible, because we all want to be able to make our own choices. And having sorts of information like that are essential for us to be able to make those kind of informed choices. We all want to make our own choices in life, and I think that kind of resource is critical for us. And obviously, as I said, I worked with Jack for a while on this, and it's been a great resource there. But I think there's more we can do to expand that and share that with a wider audience as well out there, and particularly for international visitors when they come in a couple of years as well.
Thank you for sharing. We do have a panel that we did with Mr. Jack Saba to celebrate the ADA back in the first week of August, I believe. So if any of you are interested in that, maybe you should go and give that a listen and hear more about what Accessible Qatar is coming up with.
Thank you so much, Khansa. And I already shared the link in the chat box so you can benefit from it. Thank you. The other question that we have is, what has proven to be the most effective means of convincing people with disabilities to care about investing in infrastructure and programs that help and are inclusive of peoples with intellectual and physical disabilities? So people who don't have disabilities, how can we convince them to invest in having programs, infrastructure that would benefit people with disabilities?
I mean, I guess I can sort of begin with that and then everyone can sort of add on to it. I think more often than not, people with disabilities are just generally willing to listen to anything that you can give them, which will improve their life. For instance, you come to me and tell me that, you know, I've developed this screen reader for you. You know, I'd like you to give this a try. I'd be willing to give that a try, because we're always looking for new solutions and innovative ways to sort of make that make life easier, make things more accessible. I'd say that's the first part of it. But then the second part of it is obviously you doing your market research properly. A lot of times people come up with these products and these advertisements for things that really aren't needed, or things that are already being, you know, that are already being done properly, and you're like, but you don't really need this. Why are you coming up with this? I already have a good workaround with this. So yeah, just pitch it to them. But Sabika, maybe you'd like to add something to it.
You know, I'll go back to the usual point about conversations, and it's about what you mentioned earlier about the slogan about not about us, without us. It's about ensuring the inclusion of voices to kind of build solutions that are really sustainable and actually meet the needs of people that we are targeting here. So I think that ideally, we want to make sure that we have a comprehensive team. We have a diversity of voices on board. We come up with solutions that really target the problems we're trying to solve. And that includes, yes, it includes voices of people who are going to benefit from this. It also includes voices of a mainstream community, so that we could get that extra buy-in, to get that extra investment of interest to make things work.
I think that's very significant as well. I think the more the thing is going to be used, obviously it's going to be invested in, it's going to be, considered, it's going to be spoken about. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's very important. Mark, would you like to add anything to this question?
I think the thing I'd say on the infrastructure side of things is that good infrastructure should be inclusive. So it should be benefiting everyone. So it's not just about disability, but we do know if we do it for people with disabilities, that it should be the benefit of everybody. So whether you're perhaps of an older age, but you don't perceive yourself as having a disability, it might be perhaps that you have young children, but the spaces work better for you. They're more calming, more controlled. We think about elements such as lighting that are more sympathetic. We think about natural lighting. We think about people, pregnant women, for example, using those spaces. People that lack confidence in particular areas or suffer anxiety, to give spaces that are quiet and reflective, areas to be in, as well as ones which are more stimulating and dynamic. So infrastructure can play a big part for everyone, but it's not the only solution. It's part of the solution. As I think we've all said now, that you still need other elements to fit into it. There needs to be technology elements for some people. There needs to be understanding. There needs to be an awareness. And there needs to be just an integration of other people's needs and understanding what other people's requirements are. So it should be part of the solution, but it can never solve it all by itself.
Absolutely. So I want to be mindful of time because I am sure everyone has other commitments after this. So we can one more question.
Sorry, yes, thank you, Khansa. But before that, I would like to mention that Jack thanks all of you, and thanks Mark in particular for sharing the idea about accessible Qatar. So the other question that we have is, are there any new educational centers for special needs? And there were lots of questions concerning the education. So how can, like 3 questions about education in schools, the advocacy of people with disabilities in schools. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. would you like to maybe begin talking about this?
Yes. Just I want to let you know that recently I was involved in Ru'a Center. Ru'a Center, which is like a center belong to Ministry of Education. All the disability, they will be evaluated over there, and regarding their disability, and accordingly they will be directed to the proper way of education. Let's say before they were doing this activity in very short or in very narrow. Now they are just looking for help from all the subspecialty, which is very good. And they now, like for example, they were sending us the reports for patient or for disabled student with hearing disability, and they were just asking for our opinion, because you know that for this center they are just following with them, let's say for 3 days for evaluation, but they are spending days and years with us, which is like we have a lot of information about them. This pathway, it make like life easy for so many parents and teachers. Now all the disabled, they know the direction where to go. Before they were like mix up. They are like, for example, they were directed to one place, and they couldn't find what they need. But now, after this collaboration between Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health, now they were able to distribute disability among different centers available in Qatar.
Thanks for sharing. Would anyone else like to add anything to it?
I would like to add that there are many free institutions in Qatar and many centers. For example, Shafallah Center for people with disability. It's a center that has been one of the oldest centers that gives a variety of services for people with intellectual and developmental disability. As a person, my personal experience, we don't forget Mustashfa Mela, where diagnosis is made for kids with disability, and where there is a very big, large team that can direct you to many different places And we have many private centers in Qatar also. Yes. And they are all accessible.
Thank you so much. With that, we come to an end of today's panel. Before we do anything else, we'll have Ms. Karima, if she'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Khansa, and thank you truly to our panelists for such an enlightening discussion. Honestly, I'm walking away feeling richer and smarter as a result, certainly empowered to hopefully be an ally, be part of the solution, and truly to acknowledge and appreciate, as I think Mark so aptly put it, that this issue affects us all, and if it doesn't affect us now, it'll affect us in the future. It affects our neighbors and our friends, and we're all in this together. So on behalf of the U.S. Embassy, again, just wanted to thank you all for taking the time to share with us your stories, to inspire us. Thank you to the participants for their fantastic questions. As Khansa said, the work is ongoing, and truly we encourage everyone who participated today to seriously consider being part of the solution, to volunteer and sign up, and really be the change and the difference you want to see in the world. For future programs on this topic and others, please stay tuned. We intend to continue to do similar programming on our U.S. Embassy Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube pages. We look forward to our continued work with our friends and partners on today's panel. And want to thank everyone again for tuning in. Over to you, Khansa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for attending, everyone. Let's continue this conversation forward. Let's think about what we are doing and how we can make those modifications, how we can involve people around us. And next time you see a stranger, how you perhaps can volunteer 5 minutes of your time to help them or just be friends. So let's keep on having these conversations and see you next time.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. That's been
Thank
great.
you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.